for a third of their lives, and hallucinate vividly during that time, and they think we're the weird ones? Captain Zrilks's third eye twitched in disbelief as he scrolled through the xenobiology report. That's not even the half of it, sir. Lieutenant Klee adjusted her breathing apparatus, the metallic clicks of her mandibles punctuating her words. They call this state sleep, and they get cranky if they don't get enough of it. Also, they can die from lack of it. Literally die from not hallucinating enough. The two Velutarian officers stood on the observation deck of the interspecies diplomatic vessel Harmonic Convergence, watching through the one-way quantum glass as the human delegation unpacked their belongings in the guest quarters. This marked the 57th species to join the Galactic Confederation in its 12,000-cycle history, and arguably the most perplexing. Fascinating and disturbing in equal measure, muttered the captain. What's that one doing now? He pointed a tentacle toward a human female who appeared to be inserting small objects into her auditory canals. According to our briefing, they call that listening to music. They intentionally expose their ear receptors to organized patterns of sound waves for pleasure. Sometimes they even move their bodies rhythmically in response. You mean like a mating ritual? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's mating adjacent, but often it's just for fun. Captain Zrilks's exoskeleton shuddered. Fun, right. The captain had been in xenodiplomacy for over 40 cycles. He'd met species that communicated through polarized light, beings composed primarily of sentient gas, and once, a civilization of telepathic fungi. Yet humans consistently managed to surprise him in ways that challenged his fundamental understanding of what constituted rational behavior. What else does the report say? He asked, unable to tear his gaze away from the humans, as one of them began manipulating a device that made the water in their habitat extremely hot, then intentionally immersed plant matter in it before drinking the resulting liquid. Well, sir, they're mostly water, as you know, roughly 60%. Walking bags of mostly water with delusions of grandeur. The captain clicked his mandibles in what passed for a chuckle among his kind. Classic carbon-based life-form hubris. Yes, but there's more. They have a skeletal structure made of calcium. Inside their bodies? Yes, sir. An endoskeleton. But here's the truly bizarre part. They actually consume other calcium-based life forms to strengthen their own internal structures. The captain's chromatophores flashed pale yellow, the Velutarian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. You're saying they eat relatives? Not exactly relatives, sir. Different species. But yes, they consume creatures with similar biological compositions to fortify themselves. They call it drinking milk, or eating cheese. Barbaric. There's more. They periodically expose their outer membrane, their skin, to radiation from their local star intentionally until it changes color. As some kind of defense mechanism? No, sir. For aesthetic purposes. They call it getting a tan. Captain Zrilks emitted a low-frequency vibration of disbelief. Any other charming quirks I should be aware of before the official welcome ceremony? Lieutenant Klee consulted her data tablet. They expel air forcefully from their respiratory systems when amused, producing a sound they call laughter. Don't be alarmed if this happens. It's not an attack. Also, they periodically shed tears, expel excess saline solution from their optical organs when experiencing strong emotions. Emotions? You mean they haven't evolved past those yet? On the contrary, sir. They seem to have built their entire civilization around them. Their art, music, literature, even their political systems, all fundamentally emotional constructs. Primitive, the captain scoffed, scratching his carapace thoughtfully. Yet they've achieved faster than light travel. Curious contradiction. That's actually one of the points our xenopsychologists find most interesting, Klee said, her voice dropping an octave in scholarly excitement. They're simultaneously primitive and advanced. Their technological progression has far outpaced their biological and psychological evolution. Dangerous combination, muttered the captain. Yes, but potentially valuable to the Confederation. Their unpredictability has advantages. The Cerulean hive mind described them as chaos entities that occasionally produce moments of breathtaking brilliance. The Ceruleans would know, having fought 3 wars with them. 4 wars, sir. The report was updated yesterday. Captain Zrilks's chromatophores cycled through a spectrum of concerned purples. 4? But the last diplomatic dispatch was 18 standard units ago. Apparently there was a misunderstanding over mining rights in the Cygnus sector. The humans took exception to being described as predictable negotiators and launched what they called a surprise economic offensive. And they won, sir. The Ceruleans ceded 3 asteroid belts and issued a formal apology. The captain stared at the humans with newfound wariness. One of them was now standing on their hands, legs pointed toward the ceiling, while others watched and made those strange laughter sounds. "Are they malfunctioning?" he asked. "No, sir. They call it yoga. Apparently it helps them maintain physical flexibility and mental calmness. By inverting themselves against gravitational forces? Yes, sir. They do many things that seem counterintuitive." The captain's breathing slits flared in resignation. "Very well. Let's proceed with the welcome ceremony. But be vigilant. If they start leaking fluids from their optical organs or expelling air forcefully, I want security protocols ready." "Yes, sir. Though I should mention one more thing." "What now, Lieutenant?" "They've requested to bring something called dogs aboard. Apparently they're non-sentient companion species that humans keep for emotional support." "Absolutely not. This vessel maintains strict quarantine protocols." "Sir, the diplomatic brief specifically recommends accommodating this request. The humans consider these dogs to be family members. Denying their presence could start our relationship on an unfavorable footing." Captain Zrilks's exoskeleton creaked as he slumped slightly. "Fine, but they remain contained in the human quarters, and full bioscans every 6 hours. There's one more thing about the dogs, sir." "What?" "Humans have selectively bred these creatures over thousands of their years to enhance certain traits, resulting in hundreds of different varieties, from miniature versions they carry in containers to massive specimens nearly half their size." "They engineered companion species?" "Yes, sir. Some for practical purposes originally, hunting, protection, retrieving objects, but now mostly for companionship." "So they created hundreds of subspecies of another life form just to have something that would love them unconditionally?" The captain's voice held a note of incredulity. "That's an accurate assessment, sir." The captain was silent for several moments, all 3 of his eyes fixed on the humans. "You know what disturbs me most, Lieutenant?" "What's that, sir?" "The fact that I'm beginning to find their irrationality almost endearing." "That's how it starts, sir. The Arcturian delegation said the same thing. 2 cycles later, half their diplomatic corps had adopted these dog creatures and begun something called a fantasy football league with the humans. I'll maintain appropriate professional distance, Lieutenant. Now let's prepare for the ceremony. And Lieutenant." "Sir?" "If I start finding them charming, you have my permission to sedate me." Ambassador Jackson Miller adjusted his tie for the 6th time, a nervous habit he'd never managed to shake despite 20 years in the diplomatic corps. The mirror reflected back a man in his mid-50s, silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, lines of experience etched around his eyes. "Stop fidgeting, Jack," said Commander Olivia Blackwell, the military attaché assigned to the mission. As the security lead, she maintained the rigid posture and vigilant gaze that had become second nature during her 15 years with Space Force Special Operations. "You look fine." "It's not about looking fine, Liv. It's about making the right impression. This is humanity's first face-to-face with the Velutarians. The briefing materials describe them as hyper-formal and sensitive to gestures that might be interpreted as chaotic. Which is exactly why they assigned a squadron of golden retrievers as our diplomatic corps," quipped Dr. Thomas Williams, the xenobiologist, who was currently trying to coax his unruly mass of curls into something approximating professional. At 34, he was the youngest senior member of the delegation, brilliant, but with a tendency toward irreverence that simultaneously impressed and terrified his superiors. "Technically, a group of retrievers is called a wealth," offered Dr. Abigail Jones, the linguistics expert, without looking up from her tablet where she was reviewing Velutarian greeting protocols for the 1000th time. "And please don't joke about the dogs. The captain already seems concerned about allowing them on board." "Well, Rocket has diplomatic immunity now, don't you, boy?" Thomas scratched behind the ears of his service dog, a chocolate Labrador who responded with an enthusiastic tail wag. "Besides, how are we supposed to convince alien insectoids we're worth talking to if we can't even bring man's best friend?" "The same way we always do," Jackson said, finally stopping his tie adjustments. "By being unpredictable enough to be interesting, but reliable enough to be trusted." "That's humanity's superpower, isn't it?" Olivia mused. checking the ceremonial sidearm that she'd been permitted to wear as part of her formal uniform. Schrodinger's species, simultaneously the galaxy's most promising ally and its most concerning wildcard. I prefer to think of us as the universe's chaos monkeys. Thomas grinned, now attaching scientific instruments to his belt. Throw us into any system and watch us either crash it spectacularly or optimize it beyond all recognition. Both of you, enough. Jackson sighed, though a smile tugged at his lips. Remember the stakes. The Confederation controls access to 70% of the known habitable worlds in our sector. Membership means survival for our expansion efforts. Not to mention access to their medical technology, added Dr. Marcus Lee, the delegation's physician and biotechnology specialist. A quiet, methodical man of 45, he'd spent the past decade studying alien physiology. Their regenerative techniques could revolutionize human healthcare. And their propulsion systems, chimed in engineer Zoe Thompson, completing her uniform with a utility belt that somehow managed to contain what seemed like half a machine shop. Her dark skin contrasted with the silver of her Space Force uniform, and at 40, she'd spent more time in zero-G than most humans had spent on airplanes. Imagine cutting travel time between colonies by 70%. See? No pressure, Jackson quipped. Just the future of our species riding on whether insect people think we're charming instead of terrifying. The door chimed, indicating that their Velotarian escorts had arrived. Showtime, Olivia said, straightening her posture even further. Places, everyone. Remember, confident but respectful, curious but not intrusive, and for God's sake, try not to laugh too loudly or unexpectedly. Apparently it makes them think we're having respiratory distress. Jackson took a deep breath and pressed the door release. The door slid open to reveal two Velutarians, their exoskeletons a stunning iridescent blue-green that shifted colors slightly as they moved. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with 3-jointed limbs and compound eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, they made an imposing first impression. Greetings, representatives of Earth, said the taller one, its translated voice coming through clearly thanks to the advanced tech embedded in the human's earpieces. I am Officer Tlecht, assigned to escort you to the welcome ceremony. Thank you, Officer Tlecht, Jackson responded with a formal bow, exactly 45 degrees, as the protocol manual had specified. We are honored by your hospitality and look forward to establishing a productive relationship with the Confederation. The Velutarians' antennae twitched slightly, a good sign according to their briefing materials. Your pronunciation is commendable, Ambassador Miller. Our linguistics team has been studying your language diligently, Jackson replied, nodding toward Abigail, who had worked herself to exhaustion for months to ensure they could at least manage basic courtesies. The second Velutarian's attention had fixed on Rocket, who sat obediently beside Thomas. This is one of the companion species mentioned in your briefing? Yes, Thomas said, stepping forward with a respectful nod. This is Rocket. He's a specially trained assistance animal who helps me with various tasks. That was stretching the truth slightly. While Rocket had begun as a service dog for Thomas's mild anxiety, he was now more of a beloved pet who occasionally remembered his training when treats were visibly available. Fascinating, the Velutarian said, its compound eyes seemingly cataloging every detail of the dog. It shows remarkable restraint for a predator species. That's several thousand years of selective breeding and training, Thomas explained with a hint of pride. Dogs evolved alongside humans in a symbiotic relationship. They're probably the most successful non-human species on our planet because of it. The Velutarians exchanged a look that the humans couldn't quite interpret. If you will follow us, Officer Tlecht said, gesturing with an upper appendage. The captain and diplomatic representatives await your arrival. As they proceeded down the gleaming corridor, its architecture clearly designed for beings with different proportions and movement patterns than humans, Jackson found himself marveling at how quickly the extraordinary became ordinary. Just 3 decades ago, humanity had still been debating whether intelligent alien life existed. Now, here they were, walking down the hallway of an alien spaceship, about to join a coalition of species that spanned a significant portion of the galaxy. May I ask a personal question, Ambassador? Officer Tlecht inquired as they walked. Of course. Our research indicates that humans require a state called sleep, during which you become unconscious and experience involuntary mental imagery. Is this accurate? Jackson smiled. Every first contact seemed to involve this particular question. Yes, that's correct. We call the mental imagery dreams. And this is pleasant? Sometimes. Dreams can be pleasant, neutral, or disturbing. We don't fully control them. though some people can achieve limited direction of dream content through practice. The Velutarian's breathing apparatus made a clicking sound that their translators didn't convert. Remarkable. Our species enters periodic regenerative states, but we remain fully conscious and in control of our cognitive functions throughout. Never having to sleep sounds efficient, Olivia remarked. Though I'd miss dreaming. I'd miss sleeping in on Sundays, Thomas muttered, earning a subtle elbow from Abigail. We find your species' comfort with periodic unconsciousness to be courageous, Officer Tlecht said after a moment's consideration. To willingly surrender awareness in a universe filled with potential threats speaks to either exceptional trust in your security measures or a remarkable indifference to danger. Jackson suppressed a smile. I suppose we've never thought of sleeping as an act of courage. It's simply a biological necessity for us. Many things your species considers necessities are quite novel to the Confederation, the second Velutarian commented. Your requirement for external water consumption, your need for social bonding, your periodic elimination of bodily waste. Perhaps we should focus on our commonalities for now, Jackson interjected smoothly, noting the slightly horrified expressions on some of his team members' faces. We're all sentient beings seeking to understand the universe and improve our place within it. A diplomatic answer, Ambassador, Officer Tlecht replied, its mandibles clicking in what might have been appreciation. The captain will find you interesting conversationalists. They arrived at a large set of doors that parted silently as they approached. Beyond lay a spacious chamber dominated by a circular table. Around it stood various Velutarian officials, their exoskeletons displaying subtle variations in coloration and patterning that likely denoted rank or function. At the center stood a Velutarian whose exoskeleton bore elaborate markings in metallic hues, 3 large eyes fixed on the human delegation with unmistakable intensity. Ambassador Miller and the Earth delegation, Officer Tlecht announced formally. Captain Zrilks, commanding officer of the interspecies diplomatic vessel Harmonic Convergence, and appointed representative of the Galactic Confederation High Council. Jackson stepped forward and executed another perfect 45-degree bow. Captain Zrilks, on behalf of Earth and all humanity, we extend our sincere gratitude for this opportunity and our hopes for a prosperous mutual relationship. The captain's middle eye narrowed slightly while the outer two widened, an expression impossible to interpret without more context. Ambassador Miller, the captain's translated voice carried a resonant quality. Welcome aboard the Harmonic Convergence. Please, join us. As Jackson led his team to their designated positions at the table, he couldn't help but notice how the Velutarians kept glancing at Rocket, who had maintained impeccable behavior so far. Small victories, he thought. Sometimes diplomacy came down to whether your dog remembered his manners at the critical moment. Before we begin formal proceedings, Captain Zrilk said, I understand it is human custom to engage in what you call small talk, to establish comfortable social parameters. Would you find it agreeable to answer some questions about your species that have generated curiosity among our crew? Jackson nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern of these initial exchanges, the careful dance of curiosity masked as formal inquiry. We would be honored to satisfy your curiosity, Captain. Excellent. Our xenobiologists have been particularly intrigued by your species' relationship with your planetary star. Our research suggests you intentionally expose yourselves to its radiation until your external membrane changes color. Is this accurate? Thomas barely managed to suppress a snort while Jackson maintained his diplomatic composure. That practice is called sunbathing, or getting a tan, Captain. It's cultural rather than necessary, though brief sun exposure does help our bodies produce vitamin D, an essential nutrient. And this doesn't cause harm? Dr. Lee stepped in. In moderation, it's beneficial. Excessive exposure can damage our skin and increase cancer risks. Most humans are aware of these risks and take precautions. Fascinating. The captain's antennae twitched. You intentionally expose yourselves to radiation that you know can eventually kill you, for aesthetic purposes? When you put it that way, Zoe mumbled under her breath. Many species engage in behaviors that balance short-term benefits against long-term risks. Jackson offered diplomatically. I'm sure the Confederation archives contain numerous examples of such trade-offs across member species. Indeed, the captain conceded, though few so creatively embrace potential harm in pursuit of temporary aesthetic alteration. What about the dogs? Asked a Velutarian scientist, its exoskeleton a paler shade than the others. Our preliminary analysis suggests these creatures descended from apex predators, Yet they now serve primarily social functions. How did this transformation occur? Thomas brightened at the chance to discuss his favorite subject. It was a co-evolutionary process spanning thousands of years. Wolves, the ancestors of dogs, initially formed loosely mutual relationships with human settlements, likely starting by scavenging our waste. Over time, the wolves that were most tolerant of human presence received food benefits, creating selective pressure for docility. Humans then began intentionally breeding for desired traits: hunting ability, herding instinct, protection, and eventually companionship. You engineered a predator species into a symbiotic companion? The scientist's translator couldn't quite capture the tone, but the rapid vibration of its antennae suggested excitement or disbelief. Not through genetic manipulation, not initially anyway, but through selective breeding, yes, Thomas confirmed, scratching Rocket behind the ears. The remarkable thing is that dogs evolved specialized abilities to read human emotions and intentions. They understand pointing gestures, facial expressions, and vocal tones in ways that even our closest primate relatives don't. The vegetarians exchanged looks that seemed significant, though the humans couldn't interpret their meaning. Intriguing, Captain Zrilks finally said. Your relationship with these dogs suggests a capacity for long-term symbiotic thinking that the Confederation values. Jackson felt a small surge of hope at the positive assessment. The captain continued. However, other aspects of human behavior present concerns. Our observations indicate your species engages in significant intraspecies conflict and territorial disputes. The Confederation prioritizes harmonious coexistence. Like all evolving species, we have our challenges, Jackson acknowledged carefully. But our history shows a general trend toward increased cooperation and reduced conflict. The very fact that we appear before you as a unified planetary delegation rather than competing nations speaks to our progress. A diplomatic answer, Ambassador. The captain's mandibles clicked. Yet our intelligence suggests your unification is relatively recent and perhaps fragile. Olivia leaned forward slightly. With respect, Captain, is there any member species of the Confederation that didn't experience internal conflicts during their development? A ripple of clicking sounds, possibly the Velutarian equivalent of murmurs, passed through the assembled aliens. A fair observation, Commander Blackwell, the captain conceded. Evolution through competition is indeed a common pathway. The question is whether a species has moved sufficiently beyond its competitive origins to function within the Confederation's cooperative framework. Perhaps the best evidence of our capacity for cooperation lies in our relationship with dogs, Jackson suggested, nodding toward Rocket, who chose that perfect moment to yawn widely, showcasing an impressive array of teeth before settling his head back down on his paws. We transformed our relationship with another species from competition to cooperation over thousands of years. We're prepared to do the same with the Confederation, though hopefully on a somewhat accelerated timeline. The captain's chromatophores shifted through several colors before settling on a deep blue. An interesting perspective, Ambassador. The Confederation Council will consider it during their deliberations. The formalities continued for another hour, with questions about human physiology, social structures, and technological capabilities. The human delegation answered each inquiry carefully, trying to present humanity as both interesting enough to be valuable additions to the Confederation, but stable enough not to be considered threats. As the initial meeting concluded, Captain Zrilks rose from his position. We have prepared accommodations for your delegation during your stay aboard the Harmonic Convergence. Officer Tlecht will show you to your quarters. Tomorrow, we will begin formal discussions regarding potential terms of human membership in the Confederation. Thank you, Captain, Jackson replied with another bow. We look forward to continuing our dialogue. As they followed Officer Tlecht from the chamber, Abigail leaned close to Jackson. Did that go well? I couldn't read their expressions at all. I think so, he whispered back. They asked questions but didn't raise objections. In first contact scenarios, curiosity without immediate rejection is as good as we can hope for. They seemed fixated on Rocket, Thomas observed, glancing down at his dog. Maybe we should have brought more dogs and fewer diplomats, Zoe quipped quietly. Don't tempt me, Jackson muttered. At this point, I'd consider trading half our delegation for a golden retriever puppy, if I thought it would seal the deal. They keep their internal support structures inside their bodies, and they think we're the strange ones? Lieutenant Klee's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Captain Zrilks had come to recognize as her version of incredulous laughter. The internal calcium structures are merely the beginning of their peculiarities, replied Science Officer Verkst, reviewing data on a holographic display. They literally ingest the secretions of other species to nourish their young. You mean the milk substance? Asked the captain, his chromatophores displaying a pattern of scientific curiosity. Yes, Captain. They extract it from creatures called cows, another species they've selectively modified to serve their needs. The senior Veletarian officers had gathered in the ship's strategic assessment chamber after the initial meeting with the humans. Standard protocol for first contact scenarios involved thorough analysis before proceeding to substantive negotiations. What is the Confederation Security Council's preliminary assessment? Captain Zrilks inquired, turning to Intelligence Officer Mzik. Mixed, Captain. The intelligence officer's exoskeleton vibrated slightly as he accessed secure data channels. The human's technological development has been remarkably rapid, from primitive atmospheric flight to faster-than-light travel in less than 200 cycles. This acceleration exceeds all but 3 known species' developmental curves. That suggests either exceptional adaptability or dangerous instability, offered strategic analyst P. Kwa. Precisely the Confederation's concern, Mzik confirmed. However, their unification process, while indeed recent as we noted to them, appears to be holding despite significant cultural diversity. Their capability to maintain cohesion despite substantial physiological, ideological, and cultural differences is notable. And the companion creatures, these dogs? Asked the captain. Assess their significance. Science Officer Verkst's antennae quivered with enthusiasm. Potentially revelatory, Captain. The humans have managed to establish a genuine cross-species symbiotic relationship through selective pressure rather than genetic engineering. Moreover, they've done so with a predator species that might otherwise have been a competitive threat. You suggest this demonstrates their capacity for cooperative relationships? The captain's middle eye narrowed thoughtfully. It may demonstrate something more significant, Verkst continued. The ability to transform potential competitors into allies through mutual benefit rather than dominance. Few species achieve this level of cooperative evolution without resorting to hive mind structures or telepathic bonding. Yet they continue to consume other species, Lieutenant Klee pointed out. True, but predominantly species they've specifically cultivated for that purpose, Verkst countered. And there's a growing movement among humans to reduce or eliminate such consumption on ethical grounds. Captain Zrilks's chromatophores cycled through contemplative patterns of green and blue. The Confederation seeks species that can adapt to cooperative frameworks while contributing unique perspectives. The human's peculiar balance of competition and cooperation may offer insights our more collectively oriented members lack. There is also the matter of their emotional range, added Chief Medical Officer Vkr'lak, who had remained silent until now. Most Confederation species evolved to moderate emotional responses in favor of logical assessment. Humans appear to embrace emotional experiences as central to their consciousness. A disadvantage, surely. Lieutenant Klee clicked dismissively. Not necessarily. Vkr'lak's feeding appendages twitched in the Veletarian equivalent of a thoughtful frown. Their emotional architecture appears to drive innovation in unexpected ways. Their artistic and creative outputs often emerge from emotional states that other species would consider disadvantageous. You suggest their irrationality has benefits? The captain couldn't quite keep the skepticism from his vocal harmonics. Consider their music, Captain, Vkr'lak continued. They create rhythmic sound patterns that serve no obvious practical function, yet they dedicate substantial resources to this activity. Our preliminary analysis suggests these patterns may stimulate neural pathways in ways that enhance creative problem-solving. Fascinating if true, Mzik acknowledged. But does this compensate for their obvious biological inefficiencies? They require sleep. Their sensory apparatus is severely limited compared to many Confederation species, and their physical endurance is unexceptional. Yet they've managed to compensate through technological augmentation, Verkst noted. Their adaptive technology suggests they're acutely aware of their limitations and actively work to overcome them. Captain Zrilks absorbed the various assessments, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of deep consideration among Veletarians. The Confederation Council will require our formal recommendation within 3 cycles. Continue observation and analysis. I want particular focus on their problem-solving methodologies and their capacity for adapting to unfamiliar social frameworks. Yes, Captain, the officers acknowledged in unison. And establish continuous monitoring of the dog creature, the captain added. I find its relationship with the humans illuminating. Sir? Lieutenant Klee's head tilted in the Velutarian expression of confusion. The humans transformed a predator into a companion over generations, Captain Zrilks explained. If they can do that with a species that once hunted them, perhaps they can adapt to the Confederation's requirements despite their peculiarities. As the officers dispersed to their duties, the captain remained, gazing at the holographic display showing the humans in their quarters. They were engaged in animated discussion, their facial expressions and body language shifting rapidly in ways his species found chaotic and difficult to interpret. Yet there was a pattern to their interactions, a strange harmony within the apparent disorder. Most peculiar indeed, he murmured to himself. They sleep, they dream, they laugh, they cry. And somehow, they've made it to the stars. They're definitely still watching us, Thomas said quietly as he pretended to examine one of the alien fruits provided in their quarters. I've spotted at least 3 different types of monitoring devices since we arrived. Of course they are, Jackson replied, maintaining a pleasant expression as he poured himself a glass of water. Standard protocol. We do the same. Just act natural. Define natural when you're being observed by giant alien insects, Zoe muttered, tinkering with a small device she'd brought. Should I scratch behind my ear with my foot to seem relatable? Very funny, Olivia said, though a smile tugged at her lips. The meeting went well, all things considered. They seemed genuinely curious rather than suspicious. That bit about sunbathing being radiation exposure for beauty was priceless, Thomas snickered. Makes us sound completely insane. Most species would consider intentional UV exposure for melanin production to be a peculiar risk calculation, Dr. Lee pointed out, just as we find their molting process disturbingly wasteful. God, imagine shedding your entire skin at once. Zoe shuddered dramatically. Focus, please, Jackson said, gesturing subtly toward the ceiling to remind them of the monitoring. Initial assessment. What are our strengths and weaknesses from their perspective? Abigail set down her tablet. Linguistically, we're adaptable. They seemed impressed that we've made progress with their communication patterns. That's a positive. Technologically, we're behind but catching up fast, Zoe added. Their propulsion and energy systems are about 2 centuries ahead of ours, but our computational approaches are novel enough to be interesting. I caught their engineers' equivalent of raised eyebrows when I mentioned our quantum entanglement experiments. Biologically, we're bizarre to them, Marcus said with clinical detachment. Our endoskeleton, our sleep requirements, our emotional expressions, they find all of it alien, obviously, but not necessarily negative. More like quaintly primitive with occasional unexpected advantages. Such as? Our sensory integration is actually more sophisticated than theirs in some ways, Marcus explained. They process more individual data points, but our brains create more cohesive, holistic interpretations. It's quality versus quantity of perception. And Rocket was definitely a hit, Thomas added, scratching his dog's ears. Their fascination with our relationship to dogs might be our secret weapon. Let's not oversell it, Jackson cautioned. But yes, our historical coevolution with other Earth species demonstrates our capacity for mutually beneficial relationships, which aligns with Confederation values. So what's our strategy for tomorrow? Olivia asked, subtly checking that her sidearm was still secure in its ceremonial holster, a habit Jackson had long since stopped trying to break her of. Honesty with strategic emphasis, Jackson said after a moment's consideration. We acknowledge our history of conflict but highlight our trajectory toward cooperation. We're candid about our technological limitations but showcase our rapid adaptation curve. And we emphasize our unique perspectives and problem-solving approaches. The value of diversity is a cornerstone of Confederation philosophy, according to our briefings. And if they ask about the less flattering aspects of human history? Abigail asked quietly. Jackson's expression grew more serious. We don't lie. Their intelligence is undoubtedly comprehensive. We acknowledge our mistakes, emphasize our capacity for moral growth, and demonstrate how we've institutionalized ethical principles into our governance structures. Thomas flopped dramatically onto one of the alien seating platforms, which adjusted its contours to his body in a way that made him jump slightly. So we just have to convince highly advanced insectoid aliens that the species that went from throwing spears to splitting atoms in the blink of cosmic time, while simultaneously waging wars over resources, ideology, and territory, is totally ready to play nice in the galactic sandbox. Pretty much. Jackson nodded with a wry smile. No pressure, Zoe quipped. Rocket, perhaps sensing the tension in the room, stood up and made a circuit of the team members, stopping at each for a brief moment of connection, a head placed on a knee, a gentle nudge of the hand, the simple comfort of touch. "You know," Abigail said, scratching behind the dog's ears when he reached her, "maybe Thomas is right about Rocket being our secret weapon. Look at how naturally he's providing emotional support to all of us without anyone having to ask." 12,000 years of coevolution at work, Marcus nodded. They've become exquisitely attuned to human emotional states, which the Velutarians clearly find fascinating, Jackson mused. The relationship between humans and dogs demonstrates something they value: the transformation of competition into cooperation through mutual benefit rather than domination. "So our strategy is, be more like dogs?" Thomas joked, but there was a thoughtful undercurrent to his voice. "Not exactly," Jackson replied, "but there's something there. We showcase our capacity for forming genuine bonds across differences, whether between humans of different cultures or between species. That adaptability might be our most valuable trait from their perspective." "Dogs and humans against the universe," Zoe grinned. "I can think of worse bumper stickers." 3 days of intensive negotiations followed. The human delegation presented Earth's case for Confederation membership, acknowledging their limitations while emphasizing their potential contributions. They shared historical records, scientific achievements, cultural outputs, and detailed their governance structures. They answered countless questions about human biology, psychology, and social systems, often finding themselves explaining concepts they'd never before needed to articulate. On the 4th day, Captain Zrilk summoned them to the central chamber. "Ambassador Miller," the captain began formally, his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lighting, "the Confederation Council has reviewed our assessments and your delegation's presentations." Jackson maintained a neutral expression, though his heart rate accelerated. Beside him, he could feel the rest of the team similarly tense with anticipation. "Your species presents a unique case," Captain Zrilks continued. "You are simultaneously less advanced than many Confederation members in certain technologies, yet remarkably sophisticated in others. Your social structures contain both concerning competitive elements and impressive cooperative frameworks. You are, by Confederation standards, unpredictable." Thomas shifted slightly, and Jackson could practically feel him restraining a sarcastic comment. However, the captain's middle eye fixed directly on Jackson. "The Confederation was not formed for species that are identical, but for those who can contribute distinct perspectives while committing to common principles of mutual benefit and peaceful coexistence." The captain's chromatophores shifted to a color the humans hadn't seen before, a deep, resonant gold that seemed to pulse slightly. "After considerable deliberation, the Council has approved humanity's provisional membership in the Galactic Confederation." A ripple of relieved tension passed through the human delegation, though they maintained their composure as protocol demanded. "Thank you, Captain," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Humanity is honored by this decision and committed to fulfilling our responsibilities as Confederation members." "There will be an adjustment period," Captain Zrilks noted, mandibles clicking. "Cultural exchange programs, technological standardization protocols, legal harmonization processes, all to be implemented over the next 50 cycles." "We understand and accept these terms," Jackson nodded. "One final matter," the captain added, his 3 eyes shifting to focus on Rocket, who had remained impeccably behaved throughout the proceedings. "The Council was particularly impressed by your species' relationship with your companion animals. As a gesture of cultural exchange, we request permission to establish a small observation team to study this interspecies dynamic more closely." Jackson blinked in surprise. "You want to study dogs?" "And their interactions with humans, yes. The evolutionary and social processes that transformed a competitive relationship into a symbiotic one may offer insights valuable to the Confederation's ongoing mission of fostering cooperation among diverse species." Thomas was grinning now, unable to contain himself. "So you're saying that after all our technological achievements, artistic creations, and scientific discoveries, what really impressed you was—" The captain's mandibles moved in what the humans had come to recognize as the Velutarian equivalent of thoughtful consideration. "Your achievements are indeed noteworthy, Dr. Williams. But they are, ultimately, expected outcomes of any sentient technological species. What is truly remarkable? What makes humans genuinely unique among known spacefaring civilizations? Is your capacity to forge deep emotional bonds with an entirely different species and transform that relationship from predator-prey dynamics to mutual care and cooperation. Thomas gave Rocket a proud scratch behind the ears. In essence, the captain continued, the most intriguing aspect of humanity is not your technology or even your adaptability, but your peculiar emotional architecture that enables cross-species empathy without telepathic capabilities. This trait is rare and potentially valuable to the broader Confederation community. I never thought I'd say this, Zoe whispered, just loud enough for the humans to hear. But we may owe our acceptance into galactic society to humanity's weird obsession with cute animals. So the fact that we think we're the normal ones, that's what makes us valuable? Thomas asked, unable to resist the philosophical question. Precisely, Dr. Williams. The captain's chromatophores flickered with what might have been amusement. Every species in the Confederation believes itself to be the standard against which others should be measured. It is only by embracing the reality that there is no single normal that genuine cooperation becomes possible. Captain Zrilks's feeding appendages arranged themselves in what the humans recognized as their formal posture. Welcome to the Galactic Confederation, representatives of Earth. You will find it a community of the profoundly abnormal, each contributing their unique peculiarities to our shared endeavors. As formal proceedings concluded and the humans gathered to begin the complex process of integrating Earth into the Confederation, Thomas knelt beside Rocket. Hear that, boy? Turns out the most impressive thing about humans is that we figured out how to be friends with you. He ruffled the dog's fur affectionately. Who's a good interstellar diplomacy secret weapon? You are. Rocket, unconcerned with galactic politics but deeply attuned to the happiness in his human's voice, wagged his tail enthusiastically. From across the chamber, Captain Zrilks observed the interaction with all three eyes. Fascinating, he murmured to Lieutenant Klee. They communicate with the companion creature as though it fully comprehends their language, despite knowing it doesn't. Anthropomorphization, Klee replied, projecting their own characteristics onto another species. Perhaps. The captain's chromatophores shifted thoughtfully. Or perhaps they recognize something the rest of us have missed, that understanding transcends conventional communication. As the humans celebrated with their characteristic emotional expressiveness, what the Velutarians had come to recognize as their version of joy, Rocket moved among them, seemingly participating in and enhancing their happiness. You know what's truly ironic, Lieutenant? The captain observed. What's that, sir? The humans believe their capacity for technology, language, or abstract thought makes them exceptional. But what truly distinguishes them is something far simpler, their ability to care deeply about beings fundamentally different from themselves. The captain's mandibles moved in what the humans had come to recognize as the Velutarian equivalent of thoughtful consideration. Your achievements are indeed noteworthy, Dr. Williams. But they are, ultimately, expected outcomes of any sentient technological species. What is truly remarkable? What makes humans genuinely unique among known spacefaring civilizations is your capacity to forge deep emotional bonds with an entirely different species and transform that relationship from predator-prey dynamics to mutual care and cooperation. Thomas gave Rocket a proud scratch behind the ears. In essence, the captain continued, the most intriguing aspect of humanity is not your technology or even your adaptability, but your peculiar emotional architecture that enables cross-species empathy without telepathic capabilities. This trait is rare and potentially valuable to the broader Confederation community. I never thought I'd say this, Zoe whispered, just loud enough for the humans to hear. But we may owe our acceptance into galactic society to humanity's weird obsession with cute animals. So the fact that we think we're the normal ones, that's what makes us valuable? Thomas asked, unable to resist the philosophical question. Precisely, Dr. Williams. The captain's chromatophores flickered with what might have been amusement. Every species in the Confederation believes itself to be the standard against which others should be measured. It is only by embracing the reality that there is no single normal that genuine cooperation becomes possible. Captain Zrilks's feeding appendages arranged themselves in what the humans recognized as their formal posture. Welcome to the Galactic Confederation, representatives of Earth. You will find it a community of the profoundly abnormal, each contributing their unique peculiarities to our shared endeavors. As formal proceedings concluded and the humans gathered to begin the complex process of integrating Earth into the Confederation, Thomas knelt beside Rocket. Hear that, boy? Turns out the most impressive thing about humans is that we figured out how to be friends with you. He ruffled the dog's fur affectionately. Who's a good interstellar diplomacy secret weapon? You are. Rocket, unconcerned with galactic politics but deeply attuned to the happiness in his human's voice, wagged his tail enthusiastically. From across the chamber, Captain Zrilks observed the interaction with all three eyes. "Fascinating," he murmured to Lieutenant Klee. "They communicate with the companion creature as though it fully comprehends their language, despite knowing it doesn't." "Anthropomorphization," Klee replied, "projecting their own characteristics onto another species." "Perhaps." The captain's chromatophores shifted thoughtfully. "Or perhaps they recognize something the rest of us have missed, that understanding transcends conventional communication." As the humans celebrated with their characteristic emotional expressiveness, what the Velutarians had come to recognize as their version of joy, Rocket moved among them, seemingly participating in and enhancing their happiness. "You know what's truly ironic, Lieutenant?" the captain observed. "What's that, sir?" "The humans believe their capacity for technology, language, or abstract thought makes them exceptional. But what truly distinguishes them is something far simpler: their ability to care deeply about beings fundamentally different from themselves. Not a trait one would expect to be evolutionarily advantageous," Klee noted. "And yet here they are." The captain clicked his mandibles in a gesture of profound contemplation. "Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson they bring to the Confederation. That the universe's greatest innovations sometimes arise from what appears, by all logical standards, to be beautiful irrationality." In the celebration, Jackson caught the captain's gaze and raised his glass in a human gesture of acknowledgement and respect. After a moment's consideration, Captain Zrilks raised his nutrient vessel in return. The Confederation had just become a bit more peculiar, and perhaps, though time would tell, a bit more complete. The end. "Wait, is that a human?" The whisper rippled through the gymnasium like a shockwave, causing every appendage, tentacle, and sensory organ to twitch in unison. The collection of alien students, representing 37 different species from across the Galactic Confederation, collectively inched away from the entrance, as though the very fabric of space had torn open to reveal some eldritch abomination. In reality, it was just Katie Thompson, 5'7", 140 pounds, wearing standard-issue gray gym shorts and a blue t-shirt with "Earth" emblazoned across the chest in faded white letters. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a water bottle that, to her classmates' horror, contained actual H2O, one of the most corrosive substances in the known universe. "Good morning," Katie said with a small wave, completely unaware of the mass panic she'd just instigated. Galorp, a gelatinous cube of sentient protoplasm from Rigel 4, withdrew 3 of their 7 eye stalks into their body cavity. "It's smiling," Galorp gurgled to their friend Expst. "That's how they display aggression before they attack. I saw it on a documentary." "Actually," Katie called out, her enhanced hearing picking up the comment easily. "On Earth, smiling is a sign of friendliness. I'm just saying hello." Expst, an insectoid with a metallic exoskeleton that chimed melodiously whenever they moved, clicked their mandibles anxiously. "It can hear us from across the room. The documentary was right about their enhanced predatory senses." Katie sighed. This was going exactly as the orientation counselor had warned her it might. She was the first human to attend the Galactic Confederation Academy, a prestigious institution meant to prepare the brightest young minds for careers in interstellar diplomacy, commerce, and culture. And decades after Earth had been discovered and reluctantly admitted to the Confederation, humans remained something of a curiosity, and a terrifying one at that. "All right, students, assemble by species for roll call." The instructor, Professor Zxl, hovered into the gymnasium on his anti-gravity disc. A member of the gaseous Vkr'lakian race, Zxl existed as a vaguely humanoid cloud of purple vapor contained within a specialized environment suit. His voice emerged from a speaker on the disc, translated into Standard Galactic with only the slightest delay. Katie walked to an empty section of the gym floor and stood alone, keenly aware of the gap between her and the nearest students. A group of 4-armed, blue-skinned Andorians who kept shooting her nervous glances. "Ah, our human student has arrived," Professor Zxl announced, his vapor form swirling in what might have been excitement. "Class, I expect you to extend all appropriate courtesies to Student Thompson. Remember, the Confederation values diversity, and Earth is a full member world, despite its unusual characteristics." "You mean despite it being a death world?" muttered one of the Andorians, just loud enough for Katie to hear. Professor Zxl either didn't hear the comment or chose to ignore it. "Today we begin our unit on adaptive physical education." Each species will demonstrate a physical activity common to their homeworld, and we will all attempt to participate or adapt the activity to our various physiologies. Katie brightened. This was perfect. A chance to show her classmates that humans weren't just the terrifying apex predators of nightmares. Student Thompson, since you're our newest addition, perhaps you'd like to begin. Show us an activity from Earth? Or maybe not so perfect. Katie felt the eyes, eye stalks, sensory pits, and various other visual organs of her classmates all trained on her. What Earth activity could she possibly demonstrate that wouldn't reinforce every terrible stereotype about humans? Not running. Humans' unusual endurance was already legendary and frightening to most species who evolved as sprinters or ambush predators. Not weightlifting. Earth's higher gravity meant Katie could lift weights that would crush many of her classmates. Definitely not anything involving water. How about hacky sack? She suggested, pulling a small fabric ball from her gym bag. Professor ZXL's vapor cloud formed a question mark shape. Please explain this hacky sack. It's a non-competitive game where you keep a small softball in the air using your feet. It's just for fun, and it's actually kind of meditative. Katie demonstrated, bouncing the small ball on her foot, then knee, then the other foot. Most interesting, Professor ZXL said. Students, observe the human's control over its lower appendages. Galorp wobbled forward, curiosity apparently overcoming fear. Those are the same appendages they use to chase down prey over long distances until the prey collapses from exhaustion, correct? Katie caught the hacky sack and suppressed a groan. We don't really do that anymore. Hasn't been necessary since the agricultural revolution, about 10,000 years ago. That was practically yesterday, exclaimed Sabzt, whose species had achieved sentience some 2 million years before humans descended from the trees. Look, Katie said, tossing the hacky sack gently toward Galorp, who flinched dramatically as though she'd thrown a grenade. Hacky sack is fun, non-threatening. Anyone want to try? There was a long, awkward silence. Then, to Katie's surprise, one of the Andorians stepped forward. I am Thrix, they said, their forearms held in a formal gesture of greeting. I will attempt your Earth game. Katie broke into a genuine smile, which caused several students to take an instinctive step back. Great, just use your foot to bounce it back to me. She gently kicked the hacky sack toward Thrix, who, with surprising grace, extended one clawed foot and bounced it back. The hacky sack soared through the air in a perfect arc, landing squarely in the center of a Vkr'lak student's gelatinous body mass, where it was promptly dissolved by digestive enzymes. Oh no, I'm so sorry, the Vkr'lak burbled in distress. It was a reflex. Oh dear, it's completely broken down at the molecular level now. Katie waved away the apology. It's fine, really. I have more. She pulled another hacky sack from her bag. You carry multiple weapons? Someone gasped. They're not, Katie began, then sighed. Never mind, let's try something else. Professor ZXL, perhaps sensing the rising tension, intervened. Perhaps we should move on to another species demonstration. Student Galorp, would you care to show us an activity from Rigel 4? Galorp oozed forward, their gelatinous body pulsating with what might have been nervousness. On my world, we practice harmonic oscillation. The goal is to vibrate one's cellular structure at precisely the frequency that resonates with the planetary core. The professor's vapor form condensed slightly, and what Katie had learned was a gesture of approval. Excellent, please demonstrate. Galorp's translucent body began to shimmer, producing a low, pleasant hum that gradually increased in pitch and complexity. Soon the entire gymnasium floor was vibrating subtly, creating an intricate pattern of ripples that reminded Katie of the patterned sand forms when vibrated at different frequencies. Beautiful, she said sincerely. May I try to participate? Galorp's vibrations faltered in surprise. You wish to, but humans are solid. Your cellular structure is rigid and inflexible. True, but I might be able to approximate it. Katie sat cross-legged on the floor and began to hum, attempting to match the resonant frequency Galorp had been producing. She couldn't vibrate her cells individually, of course, but she could feel the floor's vibrations and tried to synchronize with them. After a moment, Galorp cautiously extended a pseudopod toward Katie, touching the floor near her. It's not terrible, they admitted. You're only about 40% off the optimal frequency, which is impressive for a solid-state life form. Thanks, Katie said, deciding to take it as a compliment. Human vibrations are actually somewhat soothing, Exbst observed, their mandibles clicking in surprise. Not at all like the war drums they use to signal the start of a hunt. We really don't, Katie began, then thought better of it. Baby steps. The class continued with demonstrations from other species. A complex anti-gravity dance from the Yoigar, who evolved in a gas giant, a mesmerizing color-changing display from the photosynthetic Floxy, and a mathematical rhythm game from the hive-minded Vex that Katie couldn't quite follow but appreciated nonetheless. As the students took turns sharing their physical traditions, Katie noticed the gap between her and her classmates gradually shrinking. By the time Professor Zizixel announced the end of the period, she was no longer standing in isolation. A productive first session, the professor announced. Next time we'll continue with more demonstrations and begin adapting these activities for cross-species participation. As the class began to disperse, Thrix the Andorian approached Katie. Human. Thompson, isn't it? Your hacky sack was interesting, though unfortunately dissolved. Perhaps next time you could show us more Earth activities? Katie smiled, careful not to show her teeth. I'd like that, and please call me Katie. Katie, Thrix repeated, the name sounding strange through their translator. I have been studying Earth culture as a secondary specialty. Is it true that humans voluntarily immerse themselves in dihydrogen monoxide for pleasure? Swimming? Yeah, lots of us enjoy it. Thrix's forearms made a complex gesture that Katie couldn't interpret. Fascinating. Terrifying, but fascinating. Your species continues to confound xenobiologists throughout the Confederation. We're really not that complicated, Katie said, shouldering her gym bag. Honestly, we're just trying to get by like everyone else. The difference, Thrix replied, is that getting by for a human often involves surviving conditions that would kill most sentient species instantly. Before Katie could respond, Galorp oozed over to join them, moving with what seemed like marginally less terror than before. Human Katie, Galorp said, I have a query. The documentary said humans must consume other lifeforms daily, or they begin to weaken and eventually die. Is this accurate? Katie suppressed a sigh. Yes, we're omnivores. We eat plants and sometimes animal products. How frequently must you feed? Galorp's entire body quivered slightly. 3 times a day is standard, though we can go much longer if necessary. Galorp and Thrix exchanged a look of horror. 3 times every rotation of your planet? Thrix clarified. That's excessive. Our metabolisms run hot, Katie explained. High energy consumption for high energy output. It's just how we're built. And what will you consume for your midday feeding? Galorp asked, eye stalks quivering. Katie reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in paper. Just this, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Both aliens recoiled slightly. Those are plant materials? Thrix asked hopefully. Yep. Peanuts are legumes, ground into a paste. And jelly is just fruit preserve, all plant-based. Katie unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite, trying to ignore the fascinated horror with which her new acquaintances watched her chew and swallow. Most interesting, Galorp said, in the tone one might use to describe watching a potentially dangerous scientific experiment. And this sustains you? For a few hours, yeah. Katie took another bite. Would either of you like to try a small piece? It's really good. The question caused Galorp to practically tie their eye stalks in a knot of panic. Consume Earth material? But your world's biochemistry is highly toxic to most Confederation species. Thrix finished diplomatically. Thank you for the offer, but our digestive systems are incompatible with Earth-based organic matter. Oh, right. Sorry about that. Katie had forgotten that interspecies food sharing was rarely possible without significant biochemical processing. Earth's dextroamino acids were indigestible or outright poisonous to most galactic species, just as their levoamino acids would do nothing for human nutrition. Exposit approached the small group, their metallic exoskeleton catching the light. The human appears to be engaging in a feeding ritual, they observed to the others. Is it safe to approach during this activity, or must we maintain a distance for safety? I'm just eating lunch, Katie said. And it's perfectly safe to talk to humans while they're eating. We're not like... What was that species from Antares? The ones that enter a feeding frenzy? The Vkr'lak, Thrix supplied. And no, you are nothing like them. They at least have the decency to announce their feeding periods with pheromone warnings. Katie finished her sandwich, carefully folded the wrapper, and tucked it back into her bag. See? All done. No frenzy. Your restraint is admirable, Exp said, with what seemed like genuine appreciation. The documentary suggested that humans must consume approximately their body weight in food every 30 planetary rotations. That's actually not far off, Katie admitted. though most of that is water weight in the food. Ah, yes, your species' bizarre relationship with the universal solvent. Xbiz clicked their mandibles. You not only tolerate its presence, but require regular exposure to it. Katie was saved from having to explain human hydration needs by the arrival of Professor ZXL, hovering on his anti-gravity disk. I'm pleased to see interspecies socialization occurring, the professor's translated voice announced. Student Thompson, a moment of your time before your next class? Katie nodded to her classmates and followed the hovering cloud of purple vapor to a quieter corner of the gymnasium. I wanted to commend you on your participation today, Professor ZXL said, his gaseous form swirling in what Katie had learned to recognize as a pleased pattern. First contact situations are always challenging, and you handled yourself with admirable restraint. Thank you, Professor. I'm trying my best not to terrify everyone. A difficult task, given your species' reputation, but perhaps not an impossible one. The professor's vapor form shifted thoughtfully. The Confederation has long classified Earth as a Class X death world, you know. The combination of high gravity, extreme temperature variations, toxic atmosphere, abundant free-flowing corrosives, and aggressive predators makes it one of the most inhospitable worlds to produce sentient life. From our perspective, it's just home, Katie said with a shrug. And honestly, we've spent most of our history being terrified of our environment, not the other way around. Precisely why humans are such a fascinating case study, Professor ZXL's translated voice took on a tone of scholarly enthusiasm. A species that evolved in constant danger developed remarkable adaptability. It's no wonder the Confederation Security Council was initially hesitant about Earth's membership. Katie had heard this before. The fear that humans, with their remarkable endurance, resistance to environmental extremes, and efficient predatory capabilities, might pose a threat to the more environmentally specialized species of the Confederation. It had taken years of diplomatic work to convince the galactic community that humans weren't interested in conquest, just cooperation. I'm here to learn, Professor, and hopefully to help my classmates learn that humans aren't the monsters some people think we are. A worthy goal, the professor replied, though I suggest avoiding demonstrations of your species' more impressive physical capabilities for the time being. Perhaps no displays of endurance running, load-bearing capacity, or tolerance for temperature extremes until your classmates have become more accustomed to your presence. Noted, Katie said with a smile. No showcasing human superpowers. Got it. They're only superpowers from a certain perspective, Student Thompson, Professor ZXL said, his vapor form condensing slightly in what might have been amusement. I'm sure the Loigar would find your inability to perceive quantum probability states equally limiting. Fair point, Katie conceded. We all have our evolutionary quirks. Indeed. Now, I believe you have xenobiology next. I suggest you hurry. Professor Vkr'lak is notoriously punctual, and being late to his class might reinforce unfortunate stereotypes about human disregard for temporal precision. Katie thanked the professor and hurried out of the gymnasium, aware of the curious eyes following her. This whole being an ambassador for humanity thing was exhausting, but at least she'd made some progress. Golorp had stopped retracting their eye stalks whenever she moved suddenly, and Thrix seemed genuinely interested in human culture rather than just terrified of it. Baby steps, she reminded herself. Or perhaps more appropriately, baby oscillations considering Golorp's preferred exercise. By the end of her second week at the academy, Katie had settled into something resembling a routine. Wake up in her specially pressurized, temperature-controlled dorm room, standard for all students, though hers had been modified to include the extraordinarily dangerous elements of Earth atmosphere like higher oxygen levels. Attend classes. Try not to accidentally terrify her classmates with casual displays of what they considered superhuman abilities. Repeat. Her xenobiology class had proven particularly challenging. Not academically, Katie had always excelled at sciences, but socially. The class involved handling various extraterrestrial specimens, and Katie's classmates seemed perpetually concerned that her predator grip might damage the delicate life forms. Student Thompson, please demonstrate the correct handling technique for the Venusian floating spore, Professor Vkr'lak instructed, his 8 eyes blinking in sequence as he directed one of his 4 arms toward a small, iridescent orb hovering in a containment field. Katie approached carefully, aware of her classmates shuffling back to give her a wide berth. The spore, about the size of a ping-pong ball, pulsed with gentle blue light. Remember, these organisms are extremely sensitive to pressure variations, the professor cautioned. Yes, Professor. Katie said, gently deactivating the containment field and allowing the spore to drift onto her palm. She kept her hand perfectly still, barely breathing. The spore responded by brightening slightly, its color shifting toward a pleasant lavender. "Excellent technique, Student Thompson," Professor Vkr'lak said, sounding genuinely impressed. "Notice, class, how the spore's chromatic response indicates a state of calm. It perceives no threat from Student Thompson's bioelectric field." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the classroom. Katie carefully maintained her position, letting the delicate organism rest on her palm. "The common misconception," Professor Vkr'lak continued, addressing the class while Katie stood motionless, "is that predator species like humans lack fine motor control. In fact, the opposite is true. The same evolutionary pressure that developed their hunting capabilities also refined their manual dexterity to an impressive degree." Galorp, who was now in several of Katie's classes, extended an eye stalk for a closer look. "But the documentary said humans crush things accidentally all the time due to their excessive strength." Katie bit back a laugh, which might have disturbed the spore. "That's not exactly accurate," she said softly. "Indeed," Professor Vkr'lak agreed. "Humans have remarkably precise control over their muscular output. Student Thompson is currently applying less than 0.01 newtons of pressure, just enough to counteract this classroom's artificial gravity." Katie carefully returned the spore to its containment field, which reactivated with a soft hum. "Thank you for the demonstration," the professor said. "Now who would like to attempt the handling next?" Xp's metallic appendage shot up. "I would like to try, Professor." As Katie returned to her seat, she noticed something had changed. Her classmates still maintained a buffer zone around her, but it seemed smaller, less fearful, and more respectful. After class, Xpst approached her, their segments clicking softly as they walked. "Your control was impressive, human Katie." "Thanks," Katie said. "And really just Katie is fine." "Katie," Xpst repeated, mandibles adjusting to the unfamiliar name. "I have been evaluating my preconceptions about your species. The documentary I referenced, Terrifying Deathworlders, Why Earth Must Be Contained, may have presented information with a certain bias." Katie nearly choked. "That was your source? That program was made by the Containment Party. They opposed Earth's admission to the Confederation." Xpst's antennae drooped slightly. "This explains much, my apologies." "It's fine," Katie sighed. "What specifically did this documentary claim about humans?" "That you can run without stopping for days until your prey collapses from exhaustion. That your skin exudes toxic chemicals. That you can regenerate severed limbs. That you consume live prey. That you—" Okay, Katie interrupted. "Some of that is exaggerated, and some is just wrong. Yes, humans have unusual endurance compared to many species, but we definitely can't run for days straight. Our skin doesn't exude toxins. We produce sweat to cool ourselves. We absolutely cannot regenerate limbs. And while some Earth cultures do consume certain foods while they're still technically alive, it's not common practice, and we're not talking about sentient beings." Xbzat processed this information, their antennae twitching, and what Katie had learned was a sign of deep thought. "Perhaps," Xbzt finally said, "I should consult more reputable sources on human physiology." "That would be great," Katie said. "Or you could just ask me. I'm literally right here." "A primary source?" Xbzt's exoskeleton vibrated with excitement. "Yes, this is scientifically sound. I shall interview you extensively about human biological functions." Within reason," Katie qualified quickly. "Of course. I shall prepare a questionnaire for our next interaction." With that, Xbzt clicked away, leaving Katie both amused and slightly concerned about what questions might be forthcoming. As Katie walked to her next class, she found Thrix falling into step beside her. The Andorian had become something of a regular companion over the past week, seemingly the least intimidated by Katie's presence. "I overheard your conversation with Xbzt," Thrix said, their forearms moving in complex patterns that supplemented their translated speech. "They are creating quite the research project about you." "Great," Katie said dryly. "I've gone from terrifying Deathworlder to lab specimen." "Progress!" Thrix's translator conveyed what Katie assumed was sarcasm. "Though I must admit, I too have been researching Earth culture. Your entertainment media is particularly fascinating." "Oh?" Katie was both intrigued and wary. "What have you been watching?" "A historical documentary called Die Hard," Thrix replied. "Most illuminating about human resilience and problem-solving under stress." Katie nearly tripped over her own feet. That's not a documentary, it's an action movie. Fiction. John McClane isn't real, and most humans can't survive half of what he goes through in that film. Thrix's upper arms made a gesture of surprise, while their lower arms continued a rhythmic movement that Katie interpreted as embarrassment. This is disappointing. The feat seemed plausible given what I know of human capabilities. Trust me, walking barefoot on broken glass would put any real human in the emergency room, Katie assured them. Our entertainment often exaggerates what we can do for dramatic effect. Curious, Thrix mused. My species' entertainment focuses on complex mathematical puzzles and quantum state contemplation. The concept of fabricating impossible physical feats for amusement is novel. Different strokes for different folks, Katie said, then caught herself. Sorry, that's an Earth idiom. It means different species enjoy different things. Fascinating. Your language is saturated with references to physical experiences. Different strokes. This refers to swimming movements, yes? A very water-centric perspective. I never thought about it that way, Katie admitted as they reached the door to her next class. But yeah, humans do have a lot of idioms related to our physical environment. Your species' linguistic evolution is as interesting as your biological evolution, Thrix said. Perhaps we could continue this discussion during nutrition intake later. I find your insights valuable. Katie smiled. I'd like that. And Thrix, thanks for not being afraid to talk to me from the beginning. It's meant a lot. All four of Thrix's arms made a flowing gesture that Katie had learned was the Andorian equivalent of acknowledgement and acceptance. Fear is often the result of insufficient data, Thrix said simply. I prefer to collect my own data. The Academy's Nutrition Center was a marvel of xenobiological accommodation, with separate atmospheric zones, specialized food preparation areas, and feeding stations adapted to the incredible diversity of the student body. Katie's meal area, designated for oxygen breathers with carbon-based biochemistry, contained a smaller subsection specifically for Earth-compatible foods. As she collected her tray of what the food synthesizer optimistically labeled spaghetti and meatballs, it was close enough, though the texture was always slightly off. Katie noticed Galorp, Xbst, and Thrix huddled at a table near the Earth food zone. Surprising, since they usually ate in their species-specific areas. Mind if I join you? She asked, approaching their table. Galorp's eye stalks quivered in what Katie now recognized as excitement rather than fear. We were hoping you would. Xbst has prepared their questionnaire. Katie sat down, eyeing Xbst warily. Let's hear it then. Xbst produced a data tablet and began without preamble. Question 1. Is it true that humans must shut down consciousness for approximately 1/3 of every planetary rotation cycle? You mean sleep? Yes, that's true. We typically need about 8 hours of sleep per day. Fascinating. Xbst's mandibles clicked rapidly as they entered the information. During this period you are effectively helpless? Not completely helpless, Katie qualified, twirling spaghetti around her fork. We still respond to loud noises or other stimuli. But yes, we're vulnerable when we sleep, which is why early humans often slept in groups for protection. Remarkable that your species survived at all, Galorp commented, their body rippling thoughtfully. On my world, consciousness is maintained throughout all phases of existence. Different evolutionary pressures? Katie shrugged, taking a bite of her pseudo-Italian dinner. Sleep serves important functions for our brain development and maintenance. Question 2, Xbst continued. The documentary claimed humans can temporarily elevate their physical capabilities during periods of danger through a chemical process called adrenaline response. Is this accurate? Katie nodded. That part's actually true. Our adrenal glands release hormones that can temporarily increase strength, speed, and pain tolerance in emergency situations. All three aliens recoiled slightly. You have a built-in combat enhancement system? Thrix asked, forearms moving in a pattern Katie recognized as alarm. It's not exactly a combat system, Katie explained. It's a survival mechanism. The same response occurs whether we're fighting, fleeing, or freezing in terror. It's not something we control consciously. Still, Galorp's voice bubbled with concern. The ability to spontaneously enhance physical capabilities seems unsettling. Many species have emergency responses, Katie pointed out. Xbst, doesn't your exoskeleton harden when threatened? Yes, but that's a defensive measure, Xbst replied. Not an enhancement that could be used aggressively. Katie suppressed a sigh. The point is, it's just biology. Every species evolves the traits they need to survive in their environment. Humans aren't special in that regard. Except that your environment tried to kill you in more ways than most, Vkr'lak observed. Hence the remarkable array of survival adaptations. Before Katie could respond, a commotion from across the nutrition center caught everyone's attention. In the low-gravity feeding zone, designed for species from minimal gravity environments, something was clearly wrong. A Floatian student, a cloud-like being composed of gas and suspended particulates, was expanding rapidly, their normally coherent form dissipating throughout the zone. "They're decompressing!" someone shouted. "Containment breach in the atmospheric regulator!" Professor Vkr'lak, who had been monitoring the nutrition center, quickly hovered over to assess the situation. "The regulator is malfunctioning," his translated voice announced. "Pressure is dropping in the low G zone. Emergency systems are not responding." Katie watched in horror as the Floatian's form became increasingly diffuse. Without sufficient pressure to maintain cohesion, the gaseous student was literally coming apart. "Can't you teleport them to a secure area?" Galorp called out to the professor. "Teleportation requires stable matter configuration," Professor Vkr'lak replied, his own gaseous form beginning to show signs of stress from proximity to the malfunctioning zone. "The Floatian's pattern is too disrupted for transport." Without thinking, Katie jumped up from the table. "The emergency containment field generators," she shouted to Professor Vkr'lak. "The manual overrides?" "Maintenance access, far wall," the professor's translated voice crackled. "But the pressure differential." Katie was already moving, sprinting across the nutrition center toward the indicated panel. She was vaguely aware of gasps and exclamations as her classmates witnessed human speed in action for the first time. The maintenance panel was sealed with a security lock. Without hesitation, Katie gripped the manual release and pulled. The metal groaned but gave way under her Earth gravity-adapted strength, revealing a complex array of controls. "Which one?" she called to Professor Vkr'lak. "Blue sequence tertiary protocol," the professor called back. "But the pressure zone is now at 0.01 atmospheres. No oxygen breather can—" Katie had already stopped listening. She took a deep breath, held it, and slapped the emergency override that opened the access door to the low-gravity zone. The sudden pressure differential created a violent rush of air from the standard zones into the low-G area, nearly knocking her off her feet. Fighting against the wind, Katie pushed through the doorway into the low-G zone. Immediately she felt the pressure drop, a painful sensation in her ears and lungs. The moisture on her eyes and in her mouth began to evaporate instantly in the near vacuum. She knew she had seconds at most before she lost consciousness. The control panel for the containment field was on the opposite wall. With the reduced gravity, Katie launched herself toward it, floating across the room in a single bound. Her lungs burned with the need to exhale, but she knew doing so would be fatal. Tiny blood vessels were already bursting in her eyes and under her skin. She reached the panel, fingers finding the emergency containment activation. With the last of her strength, she slammed her palm against it, then everything went black. Katie awoke to the steady beep of medical monitors and the strange, antiseptic smell of the Academy's infirmary. Her entire body ached, and her throat felt raw, as though she'd swallowed sandpaper. "The Deathworlder awakens," came a familiar bubbling voice. Katie turned her head slightly to see Galorp, Vkr'lak, and Xbst gathered beside her bed, along with Professor Vkr'lak hovering nearby. "The Floatian?" she managed to croak. "Student Zorb has been successfully reconstituted and is recovering well," Professor Vkr'lak's translated voice informed her. "Thanks to your rather dramatic intervention." "Didn't even think," Katie mumbled. "Just acted." "A most remarkable display of both your species' physical capabilities and your individual courage," the professor continued. "Though the medical staff informs me that another 15 seconds of exposure would have resulted in permanent damage to your tissues." "Worth it," Katie said, trying to sit up before a wave of dizziness forced her back down. "The entire Academy is discussing your actions," Xbst informed her, mandibles clicking in what Katie had learned was excitement. "The surveillance recording has been viewed by every student and faculty member." "Great," Katie groaned. "So much for not frightening everyone with human abilities." "On the contrary," Vkr'lak said, forearms moving in a complex gesture of respect. "The general consensus is admiration." "Admiration?" Katie repeated, not sure she'd heard correctly. Galorp's body rippled enthusiastically. "You risked your physical integrity to save another student. Not a member of your species, not even someone with compatible biology. The documentary never mentioned humans would sacrifice themselves for beings completely unlike them." "Because that idiotic documentary was propaganda," Katie sighed. "Look, what I did wasn't some special human thing." Anyone would have helped if they could. But they couldn't, Professor Vkr'lak pointed out, his vapor form swirling thoughtfully. Only a species evolved on a high-gravity, high-pressure death world could have survived those conditions long enough to activate the containment field. The same adaptations that make humans terrifying, Vkr'lak added, also make you uniquely capable in certain crisis situations. This changes the perspective considerably. Katie looked at her alien classmates with a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. So you're saying nearly dying in a vacuum has improved my social standing? Considerably, Exbst confirmed, antennae twitching in amusement. There is now considerable interest in your next physical education demonstration. Katie groaned. Oh no. Oh yes, Galorp bubbled enthusiastically. Professor Vkr'lak has approved a special session once you're recovered. The entire student body has requested to observe. The entire student body? Katie echoed weakly. Word travels quickly in a community of telepaths, empaths, and quantum-entangled consciousness, Professor Vkr'lak explained, his gaseous form creating what Katie had learned was the equivalent of a shrug. Fine, Katie sighed, then smiled despite herself. But fair warning, I'm going to teach everyone to play dodgeball. Galorp's eye stalks quivered in alarm. Is that the ritual combat where humans hurl projectiles at lethal velocities? It's a game, Katie assured them. With soft foam balls. Projectile weapons made of shock-absorbing material? Exbst clicked their mandibles rapidly. Ingenious adaptation for training purposes. Katie didn't have the energy to correct the misunderstanding. She'd have plenty of time for that once she was out of the infirmary. Rest now, Student Thompson, Professor Vkr'lak instructed, hovering toward the door. Your classmates will visit again tomorrow, I'm sure. As the professor departed, Vkr'lak, Galorp, and Exbst lingered. We brought you something, Vkr'lak said, producing a small package wrapped in iridescent material. A token of appreciation, Galorp added. And friendship. Katie carefully unwrapped the package to find a small crystal orb containing what appeared to be a miniature nebula, swirling with colors and tiny points of light. It's a memory sphere, Exbst explained. A traditional gift among Confederation species. It contains impressions of our first meetings with you, preserved from our perspectives. Katie held the sphere carefully, watching as the colors shifted in response to her touch. Within the swirling patterns, she could almost see Galorp's fearful retreat, Vkr'lak's cautious curiosity, Exbst's analytical observation, all gradually transforming into something warmer, more accepting. This is beautiful, she said, genuinely touched. Thank you. Perhaps someday you could share with us a traditional Earth friendship token? Galorp suggested. Katie smiled. Absolutely. Though I should warn you, it might involve friendship bracelets made of colored string, which I'd have to adapt considerably for your physiology, Galorp. A challenge worthy of intercultural exchange. Galorp's body rippled with excitement. As her new friends departed to let her rest, Katie gazed at the memory sphere, watching the patterns shift and change. From terror to friendship in just 2 weeks. Not bad for a scary Deathworlder. In the quiet of the infirmary, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Maybe being Earth's unofficial ambassador wasn't such a bad gig after all. Sure, she'd nearly died in a vacuum, but she'd also made friends from across the galaxy and changed at least a few minds about humans. Not bad for her first month of school. Though explaining dodgeball to a gymnasium full of aliens who thought balls were weapons was going to be interesting, to say the least. Katie closed her eyes, still smiling. The Galactic Confederation had no idea what they were in for once she introduced them to Earth sports, especially water polo. One terrifying Deathworld activity at a time. The end.